Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Dev Marketer channel. I'm your host, J.A. Curtis. You guys can call me Alex, and today we're going to be doing part 8 of our Advanced Blog and CMS series. We've already got the project set up, and so now today's video is going to be focused mostly on front-end HTML and CSS. So before we get too far into the project, the first thing I really want to focus on is getting the base template set up for the website. So we're going to be working on lots of content-oriented pages and lots of different forms and different things we need to build out for this project to work. But everything kind of focuses around this central template. We've got our navigation bar at the top, the footer at the bottom. This is basically the wrapper that almost every single page is going to have around it. And so before we start creating all these individual pages and these controllers and everything like that, we actually really need to get that set up so that that navigation, so we can obviously navigate to test our website, but also it's kind of important because it's on every single page. So it's a really good place to start. And I usually start with navigation on most of my projects just because, like I said, you're going to need it even before you get to the first. You start designing the first page, and you're going to realize that you need the navigation to really complete that first page, whatever page you're working on. So the navigation is a really good place to start, and that's what we'll be doing in today's video. So just a heads up, we're not going to be doing very much with PHP or Laravel or anything like that. It's mostly going to be working with Blade. We'll be doing the Blade templating engine, and then mostly HTML and CSS, or actually it'll be Sass. We'll be working with that today. It's mostly front-end development stuff to get the top navigation set up. Okay, so the first thing I want to do before we actually start doing the templates is I actually want to run the PHP artisan make auth command. Okay, so this is the command you guys are probably familiar with. This is what sets up the authentication scaffolding. And you might wonder why I am running that command here and before anything else. Why am I already jumping into authentication? And the reason is because when we run this authentication scaffolding, it actually starts setting up these templates. So we're going to have this layouts folder with our different layout templates, and it's going to set up a few things just to make the template, I guess we're going to be using long term, and it's going to kind of set up that folder structure that we want. So that's why I'm going to run this, and then we're going to go through, design the navigation, and then the next video we're going to start by working on the login and sign in, the login and the register pages. And so having this authentication scaffolding out of the way is actually a really good thing to do. So I'm going to just run it real quick, and this is going to change the project just a little bit. We can take a look at what it added here. Okay, so as you can see here, since I have this is Git controlled service, Git version controlled. You can actually see here and add them. So any of these green folders have new items in them. The orange ones have modified items. So you can see here routes has been modified. We now have all these authentication routes. This is the logout route, the register route, and stuff like that. We're not going to worry about it today. The primary focus of what we're doing today is the resources and views. And you can see there's lots of new stuff in here, and all this new stuff is going to be what we're focusing on today. So we've got our this is like our home page. It's gonna be like the dashboard page basically, and you can see everything extends this layouts.app file. If we go look at that layouts.app, this is actually the template file that everything is inheriting from, okay? So all these individual pages are basically being inserted here into this yield statement, the yield content. Again, you guys should all know all this. So this basically represents all the generic stuff that's going to be on every single page, like our header and our footer. So that's what we want to do today. And it also adds things like your meta tags. So it's important to make sure we got this CSRF token. That's the other reason we wanted to run the authentication scaffolding. It does add the meta tag for your CSRF. This is what gets pulled into Axios so that when we run an AJAX request, the CSRF token is submitted with the AJAX request. So that's really good. You can see it pulls our app name. We can actually customize the title. We probably don't need to do it this way because we'll just do Dev Marketer for now as our title, but we'll customize the title in the future. And that's basically what we need to go do. So what I want to do here is basically, let's get rid of this navigation here. And I want to customize this. So if you get rid of the navigation, it makes it a lot cleaner and easier to see. And so what we want to do is add this navigation in, and that way when we start building pages, we can just inherit from this template file. It'll get put here in the content, and they'll already have all the navigation and stuff like that. And of course, if we wanted, we could put the footer down here underneath it, but we're not going to focus on the footer today. All right. And then one thing before we get too into it, I also wanted to mention was some questions I got about the last video. Inside of the JavaScript file, a lot of people were kind of jumping ahead, which is great. and I'm having problems with Buify because we installed Buify here and then they tried to use the components in the project and they weren't working. And the reason they're not working is because they are these Buify components are view components, and so view components can only be used inside of a view object. So we have to create a view object, and then you have to use those view components inside of that view object. So let me show you how you would do that. If we're in our generic app.js file here, what we want to do is just create a general view app. So we'll do var app new view, kind of stumbling on myself here. And inside of here, we'll set it to an element. And the element that's really good to set it equal to is just this app ID. So an ID of app, and then we'll create just empty data. Since we don't really have a real view project yet, we don't really have any data or anything, but we still want to instantiate this whole app div as a view object, okay? And so now that it is, that means now this everything inside of this ID of app is going to be a view object. So this entire thing here is a view object. So now inside of any of this content or in the navigation or anything, you can now put view components and they will work now because we set up the view object, okay? So without the view object, they don't run because the view basically doesn't work yet. All right, so now everything should work. So I just want to mention that. Now, the other thing we want to do before we actually start making the navigation is set up our Sass. We did this a little bit in the last video, but this is all of our framework files. We never really got into our custom CSS files. And of course, we're going to have custom CSS. We're not just going to use the framework. The framework gives us a baseline to start working on, and then we're going to build on top of it. We're going to override certain elements, customize it, and stuff like that. So what I want to do here is at the bottom, and we like to do it at the bottom so it overrides everything above it. So you want to pull in your framework first, and then our custom stuff we want to come after it because we want to override certain elements of the framework. So if the framework says that it should align to the left, and I want to, with my custom stuff, align it to the right, I want my custom stuff to take precedence. So I always install it after. Okay, so now here I'm going to say custom Sass pages. These are going to be all the custom stuff that I've created. And then the way I like to set this up, but you can set this up however you like. This is just my personal preference. I always like to create, it's basically 3 pages, I think. I'm trying to think here. Yeah, 3 pages that we would create that include all of our Sass. So the first one I like to make is overrides. So I make a file called overrides.scss. And the idea of overrides is this is the file I go to whenever I want to specifically override something in the framework. So I'm using Bulma in this case, but Bootstrap, same thing. Whenever I want to override something from Bootstrap or Bulma, let's say we'll be doing this in today's episode, that I want to override the way they display tabs, right? Tabs are already designed in there. I still want to use most of that stuff, but I want to override a couple things. So what I'll do is in my overrides file, I'll have those overrides. And so they will basically inherit all the normal stuff from the framework and override a few things. So that's the first one I like to call. After that one, I like to have another file called helpers. And helpers.scss is a file that I like to use for like the class helpers that you might have seen people use. These are things like margin helpers to add a little bit of margin on top or on bottom, or things like that to get rid of all margin, to pull something to the left or to the right. Some of these are already included with the framework, but I like to add my own, and so those will be inside the helpers file. And then the other one that I like to have is the actual styles, okay? And this is the main styles file. Now, if you have a really big project, you might actually break this up, and you might have like all your admin stuff in one file, and then the other, your customer stuff in another file, whatever you wanted. I'll just keep it all in the styles. So this will be our general CSS styles. Helpers will be for a few helper methods, and then overrides is going to override specifically stuff that's in the framework. Okay, and this makes it easy to organize and keep track of, and that's why I like to do it this way. Okay, so now for this to work, we had to make these files. So let's just make these real quick. So inside of our Sass folder, we're going to make overrides.scss, and then let's make another file. And this will be our helpers.scss, and then the last will be our styles. Cool. All right. Now, we'll come back to our styles here in a moment, and we will also be messing with overrides at a later point in this episode. But before we actually do the navigation, I know I keep doing these more and more things before our navigation, but before we get into the navigation, I want to work with the helpers. There's one helper class that I want to show you guys. This is actually something I put in almost every project I do, and this is something that I actually created. So if I bring my GitHub over here and go to my gists, I've got this gist that I will link down in the description if you guys want to use it for yourself. And this is basically a gist that it creates spacing helpers for your Sass files. Okay, and this is really the only part you need, this little chunk of code here. All the rest of this is just comments to kind of show you how it works. And then this page down here shows you basically what it outputs. So it creates all of these little helper files. So this function that we've got up here that we're going to paste in there, after it's rendered out as CSS, it will create all these little helper files. So now we're going to be able to add margin on the top or on the bottom per div tag by just adding these little helpers. You'll see what we mean when we get to it in this episode. But let's copy all of this. So as you can see here, this is basically a function that I've written for in Sass, and what it does is it generates all those helper files for you. So with this, basically as we're working in our project, we can add these helper classes to just kind of tweak our files without having to write a specific class just to, or having like creating an ID just for one item just so we can add a little margin on the side, which is something you see people do sometimes, where like you've got some navigation element, you want a little more spacing between this in this navigation element, so you end up creating a whole ID for this one element just so you can add 5 pixels of margin on the left or something. To avoid doing that, I like to have these helper classes, so it makes it easier to read the HTML and easier for me to work with, and I don't have all these random IDs and everything in my styles.css. So that's what I like to do this. So to put this into perspective, what this does is I can add a class, like if I have div class equals, I can now do margin left 10, and this is going to add 10 pixels of margin on the left, right? If I wanted padding instead of margin, I would just make a P up here instead of an M. If I wanted it on top instead of on the left, I would add a T, a B for bottom, and an R for right, and then however many pixels we want over here. So it's kind of like this little formula I like to do to just customize that. And this is kind of a cool helper. Again, I'll have this gist linked in the bottom. You can go take a look at it and copy it and put it into your Sass files. You can also customize it up here with some variables. You're not really going to need to customize the sides, but you can customize these amounts over here. So I actually sometimes like to add a couple additional amounts, like 75 and 100. So what this will do is this will make, you can't, when you're doing these helper files, you can't just do like 32 pixels because you have to have a class for it. So you have to do one of these amounts up here. Okay, so you can set these amounts that you want up here, and then it will generate them when it goes to render your code. So if you know you don't want some of these smaller ones, you can get rid of them. You'll have less outputted CSS. I like to do them every 5 pixels, so I always can just round up to 5 pixels. Once I hit 50, then I just do bigger chunks like 75 and 100. So that's that. Let's go ahead and save this file. And now when we render it, it should render it all into our CSS file, and we will have access to it. So to make sure, let's just go ahead and run our file here. We're going to do npm run watch. That way, if we make any changes, it'll automatically update it. And let's let this run real quick. And now we will have access to those helper files, which will be great. It'll be all inside of our app.css. Okay? So that's what we need for helpers, and we may add some additional helpers as well. Like I said, Bulma comes with a lot of them, but we might have some of our own that we might want to use, and then helpers is a great file to put those in. Okay, so now let's go back over and let's actually start creating our navigation. Now, one last thing before we get over there, I want to just show you what our navigation is going to look like, because if you remember, we did this this wireframe, and so this is basically the navigation we're going for. So look up here, you can see we've got the logo on the left, learn, discuss, share. I want these to be some navigation elements that are left aligned over here against the logo. I want this this white heading here, and then when a user's logged in, I want a drop down on the right hand side. I want a drop down that has their name that they can then drop down and have options like log out, adjust their settings, go to their user profile and stuff like that. So this is what we're working on today, is this navigation up top. All right, so let's do it. So we'll start by creating, when we do this navigation, we're going to create the full navigation element. The way Bulma works, we're going to then create a nav left and a nav right. Okay, so you can think of all these are going to be pushed to the left, or yeah, to the left. And so this is going to be inside of a nav left div. This is going to be inside of a nav right div. And then each of these are considered nav items. Okay, and then each of these are going to have the style of is tab. You'll see that here in a moment. That's basically the style we're going to use to give this the look we want, which basically as we hover over it, it gives like a little line underneath to show that we're hovering over it, and it looks really good. It's the kind of style I'm a really big fan of right now. So let's go ahead and do this part. Okay, so we're going to start by using the nav HTML element. That's the HTML5 element. So instead of a div, we'll use nav, and then we're going to give it a class of nav as well. And then we're also going to give it a has shadow class so that it has basically a light shadow underneath. And again, these are all Bulma things. We haven't customized our CSS yet. We will here by the end of the video. We're going to customize a couple of these. But just to get started, we're mostly using Bulma out of the box to create this navigation. Okay, cool. So now that we got that, let's go ahead and add a container. And then inside of the container, this is just going to keep everything aligned in the middle, give it some spacing so it doesn't bleed all the way to the edges of the page. After this is where we're going to create our nav left and our nav right elements. Okay, so let's go ahead and do a nav left. This is where we're going to put our logos and our left aligned elements. And then let's go ahead and do a nav right, which is going to include our right aligned elements. Okay, so up here in the nav left, oh, and everyone's going to always ask me what I'm using for shortcuts. I'm using a plugin called Emmett, EMMETT.io is, I think, the website. I will link it down in the description if you guys want to check it out. That allows me to do these shortcuts and have it output some HTML. Okay, so I can just use these little formulas, output HTML. That's how I do it. Everyone always asks, and it makes your life so much easier once you get used to it. So that's like the only way I really write HTML anymore. I don't actually write out div class equals, and I really don't do that anymore. I always use Emmett. It's just second nature for me now. But everyone always asks how I'm doing it, so I just want to bring that forth in the video so everyone knows. It's a plugin called Emmett. It'll be in the description if you want to check it out. It doesn't cost any money. It's free. It works in every single text editor that I'm aware of. Sublime, Visual Studio, Atom, which is what I'm using, any of them, I believe. So, okay, so now that we've got everything on the nav left, what we want to do is we want to create some nav items. These are going to be each individual items. So the first one that we want to do, nav item, this is going to be for our logo. And so inside of here, all we're basically going to do is, in fact, I want this to be an anchor tag now that you think about it. And inside of this anchor tag, we want this to be an image. Okay, so we'll have a source. We'll come back to that here in just a moment. Have an alt dev marketer logo like that. And then also, because this is an anchor tag right here, we need this to go somewhere. So we'll set an href equal to the home page. So it always goes to the home page. That's pretty normal. Home, like that. And let's go ahead now and set this source. So the first thing we need to do is we need to upload an image, or not upload, but get an image in our file. So what I'm going to put it in is under public images. I'm going to put our file inside of here and we'll just call it. Now I do have this file pre-prepared. It is over here on my desktop. So you can see it here on the desktop. It is just my, it's just my logo that we've created before. Okay, so I'm just gonna go ahead and drag it here into images. So now you can see under images, dev marketer logo, that's where it's located. So now we can call that here in the source file. We're just going to call asset helper. And with the asset helper, we can basically reference anything inside the public folder. Just do the URL from the public folder. So in this case, we're going to do images / dev marketer logo.png. If I could type PNG. There we go. Okay, so now that should render that. Okay, so that's our first element. Now the next one we're going to have 3 items. If you remember, we have learn, discuss, and share. So we're going to do nav item. And this one, they're going to all have this class of is tab. Okay, so this is going to give it that underline thing. And then we're also going to want these to be hidden on mobile because we want these to go into like a mobile hamburger menu. We'll get into that down the road, but just for right now, we want them hidden on mobile. So it's going to be nav item, is tab, is hidden on mobile. We want all these classes put together, and we're going to do 3 of these links, okay? The first one, oh, shoot, you know what? Let's undo this. And I want this to be an anchor tag. There we go. So there we go. So we'll come back to all these URLs in the future. But for first, we just want learn, discuss, and share. Like that. Okay, so that's going to give us our navigation. Now, on this first one here, I do want to have a little more spacing between the logo and the tab, because by default with Bulma, they're like butt to butt. They're right next to each other. So we want to have a little padding, and we're going to use those helpers here. So we're going to add some margin on the left-hand side and probably do like 10 pixels. We'll see how it looks. We could add a little more, but we'll do margin left 10 pixels. So we're going to put that helper that we just created to use, and that'll basically finish out our left-hand side. Now on the right-hand side, what we want to do is we're going to basically have 2 different types of menus on the the right-hand side. On the right-hand side, we're either going to have a button menu that says login or sign up. That's going to be if the user is logged out, they're a guest, they're not currently logged in. We want to show a login button and a sign up button because we don't whether they're signing up or whatever. And then if they are logged in, then we want to show the drop-down menu for their profile, their notifications, and all that stuff. So that's what we're creating here. So the way we can do that is just with our blade if statement. So we're going to do blade if auth user auth guest, like that. And if they are a guest, then it's going to will be inside of this block, else. And if they're not a guest, then we will go inside of this block. So for guests, this is when we want basically, just like we have up here, we want anchor tag, nav item, is tab, and we're going to want 2 of these. And so the first one, we want this to be login, and then the second one, we want this to be sign up. Okay, or I was actually thinking we'll do like join our community or the community. There we go. Okay, so now we're gonna have 2 of these here. If they're logged out, they're gonna see these. If they're logged in now, what we want to do is we want to create a we're gonna want to create the drop down. So this is where it gets tricky because Bulma doesn't actually have a drop down out of the box. So we're gonna have to create this from scratch. So we're gonna have to write our own CSS for this because there is no drop down in Bulma, and there's also no JavaScript to enable the drop down. So we're gonna have to do all that ourselves here to get this working. Now, of course, we could use Buify and do a view component, but because this is the navigation, I actually want to write my own because I'm going to want to customize it quite a bit over what's available from the normal Buify. So I still will I definitely will still use Buify dropdowns throughout my application, but because this is the navigation, I kind of want to have full control over it. So we're going to do it custom and create it today. So we're going to spend a lot of time on this, creating this dropdown probably, but it's going to be worth it. So, okay, so the way I've done this before is I like to kind of copy the way that Bootstrap has done it. I've done this before where I've tried to create these drop downs in Bulma, and so I've kind of gotten used to how I like to do it because through a lot of trial and error. But I like to kind of follow the way that Bootstrap has set up drop downs, which is basically you create a button with an unordered list inside of the button, and that unordered list is basically the drop down menu. Okay, so the button acts as a wrapper for the whole thing, and then the unordered list is basically the options inside that you want for the drop-down menu. And then we're going to use some CSS to basically align that correctly and get it the way we want. So with here, I like to use a button instead of an anchor tag. And the reason we can't use an anchor tag is because we can't nest anchor tags inside of other anchor tags. So it doesn't work. So we have to do a button instead of an anchor tag. So what we're going to do here is we're going to have a button. We're going to give it a class of nav item, just like these other ones, because we want it to match the same style. We also want it to be is tab because we want it to have that same look as all of the other ones. Okay, so just like that, we've got our button. And inside of here, for the content of the button, we can just say like, hey, Alex, right? We'll customize this name in the future, but right now we'll just say, hey, Alex. So we'll have, hey, Alex here, and that'll be what it says, and then we'll have some sort of drop down that it can go to. We might want to put some sort of icon. So what we can do here is span class icon, and then we'll do a icon with FA. I believe this is the correct one. I'm kind of going off memory here, but I believe this will create a caret down, a little arrow down. So there we go. Hey, Alex is going to have a little arrow down to indicate that it's a drop-down menu. And then underneath here, inside of the button is where we're actually going to put our unordered list. So we want to create an unordered list, and we're going to want to give this a class of drop-down menu. Now, we haven't created this yet, so it could technically be anything, but I'm about to create it, and so we want to just emphasize that this is the actual menu for the drop-down, and this up here, this button, is the actual drop-down, which we didn't do. Okay, so let's call this out here. And up here, let's go back here, and this button up here, we want to notify that this is a drop-down. So let's give it a class of drop-down. And this is basically going to tell our CSS that we can target it now with drop-down, and then we've got the drop-down menu inside of drop-down, and then drop-down's just our container, basically. All right, so now inside of here, we're going to do LAI with an anchor tag inside, and then we want, let's see, we're going to want like 3 or 4 of these. Probably 5. Let's do 5 of these. Okay, just like that. And we just don't need these going anywhere right now. And let's just make some of these real quick. So we'll have profile. Remember, this is our actual navigation menu. So we'll have profile, notifications, settings, and then log out. And then this middle one here, I actually want to create, this is another kind of thing I got from Bootstrap that I did like, is you can create a list item with the class of separator, and that'll basically create a line to separate the items. So we can separate our log out with our other items with a line. Of course, this doesn't work. There's no CSS for this, so we'll have to create this as well. Okay, I think that basically sums up everything that we're looking to do for right now, and I think the rest we can actually go over and do in the CSS. Okay, so now we can head over in our app.css. We want to put all this style inside of our styles. Well, actually, we're going to do it inside of overrides because we're kind of overriding the Bootstrap, or sorry, the Bulma dropdown. So I'm going to put it inside of overrides. And here's where we're going to create our dropdown. This is our dropdown container. Okay, so let's go ahead and start by styling the drop-down menu. This is kind of the most important element. So the drop-down menu is the actual box that's going to have all of our options, all those list items we created. So to style the box itself, what we can do is we are going to do we're going to start off with display none. This is important because we don't want this showing by default. We only want it to show when you're hovering over it. So we will customize the display setting when we're hovering over it, but otherwise we're going to basically keep it display none. So the default's display none. When we're hovered over it, we'll display it, but otherwise we display none. So that's what we're going to do to have it show and disappear. So that's the first thing. Second thing, we need to position this thing, and we're going to position this absolute because we want to position it relative to the actual container. So we want to kind of pull it out of the container and then be able to move it around relative to that. So we want to do absolute. Now, in order for absolute to work, it needs to be positioned relative to a position relative item. I don't know what the nearest position relative item would be. Probably it's either nav left, nav right, or just the full nav would probably be what it is. So it's going to position relative to that, and we don't want it to do that. So we're going to want it to position relative to drop down. So in this case, we're going to do position relative here so that drop down has this position relative, and then the absolute will be in relation to this position, this drop down container up here. Next, we actually want to position it. So we will position it left 0 generally and top 100. And of course, this isn't an exact science, but when you're creating a drop-down menu, that's kind of the defaults. Left 0, top 100. What you're saying here is left. It's usually aligned to the left. Most drop-down menus are. So you're aligning it to the left-hand side. So it should match the left-hand side of the button. And then for top 100, we want the top of this menu to be at the bottom of this button. And that's why we have 100. So At the 100% point of this button, which would be the bottom of it, we want the top of this equal to that. So it should match and be right below the button. That's kind of the goal. All right. What else? We're going to want to, because it's position absolute, we got to mess with the index. So give it a z index of 1000, which will keep it above most other things, unless you have some crazy plugin that puts their position to like 9,999 million, whatever. Let's see. We're going to want a background color on here of white. We're going to need a set of width of, and in fact, instead of a normal width, we're going to want to set a minimum width. So let's set a minimum width of like 200 pixels. And the reason we do minimum width instead of normal width is because, I guess it depends on your preference, but if we did width, then it would always be 200 pixels, even if the content tries to go beyond 200 pixels, you have a really long list item or something. With minimum width, it's always going to be at least 200 pixels, but if one of the like lines of text is bigger than 200, it'll just expand to fit that. So that's why I like to do minimum width instead of normal width. Okay, and then let's go ahead and align all the text to the left. That's just going to look normal. And you probably want a box shadow on here. So let's go ahead and do a, let me go find, I've got a couple of box shadows I really like that I'm using on other projects. Okay, so this is the box shadow I really, really like, one of my favorite box shadows. These are box shadows that I collect and build and modify across different projects. And so this is one of my favorite box shadows. I really, really like this one. It gives it a really good effect. Most of the box shadows near the bottom, not at the top. So the top doesn't really have a shadow, but all the way around it, it's got a really big shadow. You can see here like a 20% blur shadow. It looks really good. So this is a really good one. And with that, we should basically be done. Yep, I think we should basically be done. That'll look good. So the other thing I thought of is we actually normally when you're making a drop down, you want it to align to the left. But for this one, because it's all the way to the right, I actually want it to align to the right instead of to the left. So I could change this, but I'm actually going to make a helper class. We'll just put it up here that aligns this one to the right, but by default, they align to the left. So I want to keep this by default aligned to the left, but we're going to make another class here. And we'll do the class will be is aligned right. And so if you give it this class of is aligned right, then we will, instead of aligning it to the left, we'll align it to the right. So it will override this item right here. So, and actually we want to do it lower in the file. So let's put it down here. The reason we want to do it lower is because we want this to be the default. So we want to set this here, and then this will override it if they have this class. If not, it'll stay aligned to the left. We also need to do drop down is aligned right, and then we're going to want to target the drop down menu like that. Okay, so that should be good. Yeah, there we go. Now what we'll do is we'll align it to the right this time. So we'll do right 0, so it's pushed all the way to the right. However, we also have to override this because it's going to have now left 0 and right 0, so it's going to try to squish it in the middle there. So what we want to do is kind of cancel this out. So we'll just do left auto, so it just cancels it out. It basically ignores the left attribute and just focuses on the right attribute. Should keep it aligned to the right. Also, if we open it, we're going to want to have another class that overrides this display none. So we will do is open, basically, would be a good one. Is open. So now if we give the dropdown class, if we give this the is open class with it, then we want it to override this display none and instead to display this dropdown menu. So let's do that really quick. Dropdown menu. And then we're going to do display none, or sorry, display block, like that will be good. And I think that'll do it. Let's go ahead and take a look at this in the browser. So, oops. Okay, so let's take a look at this, devmarketer.dev. We haven't done any of this yet. Let's just go to our login page here. And here we go, we can see it. So obviously this hasn't been customized. This doesn't have any styling yet. So just ignore this for now. We're just focused on this menu at the top. You can see here that as we hover over it, we get a nice little, that tab effect. It looks really good. I like that. And we have our login and join the community, which looks awesome. Now we're seeing this because we're logged out. So if we want to see the other one, we're going to need to change our code a little bit. Let's go back over to app.blade, and we're going to flip-flop this. Instead of seeing these when we're logged in, we want to see, or when we're logged out, we want to do not guest, which will now show us this element, okay? We're going to change that back. This is just for testing. Okay, so now you can see we have Hey Alex here. So it's going to show us that, and it got kind of weird styling, and we'll talk about that. It's because this is a button instead of an anchor tag. That's why it doesn't quite look like this. And in Bulma, you can't have a button with the nav item is tab class. So we're going to have to override that, but we will do that in a moment. So we don't see the element. Let's go ahead and force it open by doing drop down. We'll do is open, give it the is open class. And now it should show it is open. We don't see it, but the reason is because it's being hidden by the nav item. So we need to actually style this this overflow so that we can see this item, because this element here is actually going to overflow beyond the width, the height of this navigation. This navigation is fixed, so this is too big, and it overflows, and it's not shown by default. So we need to show that. So what we'll do here is, let's see, this is the container that it is. What's the parent of this? Would be this one. This would be the parent. So let's go ahead and give this, I'm going to inline style just for now, overflow visible. And let's take a look at that now. And there we go. So now we can see it just like that. Of course, it's aligned left. Let's align it to the right by giving it that class. We had drop down, and we did remember that is aligned right class we created. Let's give it that class, and now it should align to the right. There we go. So now see how it's aligned to the right. So we overrode the default there, and now it's showing. So that's really cool. And if we actually went in and inspected our element here, and we actually got rid of, up here was the navigation. Okay, so up here we got rid of the is open. Let's just delete it. And you can see how the navigation went away. So the it is working as correctly. We just don't have the JavaScript to do that on the fly yet, but we'll do it in a moment. So everything's starting to look pretty good. Let's refresh this. Let's just customize what it looks like inside of here, because it's a little bit ugly. I respect that. Okay, so let's go back to our overrides, and let's customize now what the actual inner content of the menu is. So inside of here, we will customize the list item. And the first thing I want to do is create that separator. Remember we made that class called separator? Let's go ahead and customize that. We will do we just want this to be a line. So we're going to do a border. Let's just do border top. We only want one border. So border 1 pixel, solid, and we're going to make it just like a light gray, which would be like CCC or something. And yeah, like that color, that's good. And then just give it a little spacing above the border. So we'll just do a margin, and just do margin 5 pixels on top and bottom. And so that'll make it go all the way to the edges and have a little spacing on top and the bottom. So let's take a look at it. So there we go. You can see this now creates a separator, a little spacing on top and bottom, and we got our line. So it's looking good. Let's now create a little more spacing around each of these list items. Or I guess these are anchor tags inside of list items. So let's give it a little spacing. So there's more spacing here, and then a lot more spacing here on the edge. So in order to do that, we're going to grab our list item and grab the anchor tag. And then we're going to add, let's see, do we want margin or padding? We're going to want margin in this case. So let's do maybe like 5 pixels by 0 by 5 pixels by, on the left-hand side, we're going to want like 10 or 15. Okay. What else do we want to do on here? Well, if they hover over one of these list items, we want it to highlight the whole line. So let's do that as well. So if they hover over one of these list items, then we're going to change the background color to a light gray. I like white smoke. And then let's see. So there you go. You see they've got a little spacing here. As we hover over them, they've got the background color. we actually want this background color to extend all the way across. So that's because this is an anchor element, this is an inline element and not a block element. So just change this here to display block, and now it should go all the way across. And there we go, that looks good. Okay, so we need to do padding on the left, not margin. That's my bad, so that the line goes all the way to the edge. So margin, let's see, all right here. Okay, we can just get rid of this. So there's no margin on the left and the right, 5 pixels on the top and the bottom. And then let's go ahead and add padding, and let's add, on padding left, we will add like 10 pixels now. And now it should go all the way to the edge. So right now you can see how it doesn't go all the way to the edge. And if we refresh, it should go. Now it goes all the way to the edge. Now let's just do a little more. Let's add a little more spacing so these bars are a little thicker. They've got some good separation here, but I just want them to be a little taller. So let's actually get rid of padding left. And we'll just do shorthand here. We'll do like 5 pixels top. Let's see, top 0, 5 pixels, and 10. There you go. Oh, look at that. It's looking good. Yeah, it looks really good. What else? Let's just position this top. It's a little too close. Let's move that down. So here for top 100%, let's do like 102, just so it goes a little bit lower, just like that. I think that's good. Yeah, that's going to look good. All right. I think that's great. I think we more or less have the design for that. So now let's go ahead and customize this button so it looks a little more natural. So in order to do that, once again, we want to override this. Let's override it down here. And we're just going to override what's in Bulma. So what we first need to do is go get the code from Bulma that it's using to create that style for these other elements, because we want it to match the style for these elements. So the reason it's not working is because in Bulma, these nav items have to be anchor tags, and we're using a button. So we basically want to copy the same code, but allow it to work for the buttons and not the anchor tags. You might also wonder why we don't just put it inside of, why don't I just change the Bulma code? Well, because we're pulling Bulma from NPM. So if I change the Bulma code directly, then when Bulma updates, or when I push this up to a server and then pull it from NPM again, it's going to override whatever I did. So by pulling this into our overrides file, now we can change Bulma, update it as much as we want, and our overrides file stays the same, and it will always override the Bulma. So that's why we don't want to change Bulma directly. We want to change our own files. So I'm going to go copy the code from Bulma and paste it into our overrides, and then go from there. Okay, so what we got here is we've got the code that came from Bulma that updates those nav items with the tab class in them, okay? So this is the nav items, and this adjusts, here's our tab one. So this is what actually gives it the effect that we're looking for. But as you can see, the problem here is that it only works for anchor tags, right? So what we want to do is make it work for buttons. Okay, so we don't need to worry about the anchor tag one because that one already works. We're just going to do it for button here. And we want all of this to basically be the same for the most part, but for buttons instead of just anchor tags. So let's do that now. Okay, so we're making progress. You can see it does have the line on the bottom for the border, but it's got this background. It's inheriting a lot of these properties from the button in general, so we need to normalize that. So we got to get rid of this background color, get rid of these borders on the edges. So let's go up to the top here, background color, and make that white or transparent, probably transparent or white. Just make it white. And then transparent's not supported in every browser, but most of them basically. It's pretty safe to use, but might as well just use white. And then border. Let's just say border none. There we go. So let's see how that works. There we go. Cool. Okay, looks pretty good. I think this is going to work good. Yeah, I think we're going to work good. So now let's just go through and let's just create well, before we go, I want to make this a little bit taller. I want to make this logo a little taller, make the navigation a little bit taller. So if you look right now, this is currently set to 3.25 rems for the navigation. So we want to adjust the navigation and override it so it's a little bit taller. Something like if we did, say, like 4. 4.5. Yeah, something like 4.5 maybe. Yeah, let's do 4.5 rem. Let's make the navigation 4.5 rem, and then we also want to hit up this item here. The image is being maintained by 1.75 rem. So if we did this to like 3 rem or something, that might be too big. 2.5. That looks good. 2.8. Okay, so now let's adjust. Here you can see nav item image. We want to override the default of nav item image, and then we want to override the default of .nav. So we'll just do those both here at the bottom of our overrides. So .nav, we wanted it to be, they were using max height. Oops, max height. And they wanted the max height to be 4.5 rem. And then for .nav, shoot, what was it? Nav item image. We want this to be max height of 2.8 rem is what we decided. Okay. There we go. So now if we refresh it, oh, it didn't work. The height didn't work. Oh, it's our max height. We just want this to be normal height. We're setting just a plain old height for that. There we go. So that's going to give us the style we want. Perfect. Okay, great. Let's go ahead and get rid of this isOpen class. Like that. And we're going to set that through JavaScript. So by default, we've got this. Perfect. I think that looks pretty good. And ignore all this stuff down here. But we're just focusing on our navigation. Okay, so now that we got that, let's go through. As we hover over this, we want the drop-down to show up. We're going to do that with JavaScript. So I think that's the end of the video. It's really all we need. Let's go through and do it in app.js. So in our JavaScript, app.js. Oh, sorry, this is in our public. We want the resources one, app.js. Okay, and we'll just go ahead and customize it down here. So we'll use jQuery just because I don't want to get into. I want to go back and refactor it at some point, but for today, I don't think we're going to do that. So I'm just going to do it in jQuery just to speed the videos along as much. It's going to take. These are going to be long videos regardless, just because I'm taking you guys along for everything. So it's going to be a long journey. I don't want to slow it down by doing. We'll just use jQuery to make it as fast as possible. Okay, so let's go ahead and do this real quick. We're just creating a default function. This is just a normal jQuery thing. This is the wrapper to make sure everything's ready to go. And then we can actually target now our items. So we want to target this button drop down. Let's target these. And when we hover over it, so let's do that. So we'll do we want to do button dot drop down. And then on hover, we will function what we're going to basically do is take this and we're going to toggle the class. I think that's right. Toggle class of isOpen. There we go. Okay, so what we're doing is we're targeting this button dropdown. We're adding the class isOpen to this same element, which is perfect. We don't need to actually navigate the DOM. So we're just going to add it to this class. And then since it's toggle, it'll automatically toggle back when we hover off. Okay. You could do a more specific hover where you have a hover on, hover off function, two different functions, and you could add and remove specifically, but this will work fine for now. Okay, so here we go. There we go. You can see it. Perfect. Let's actually adjust this height here. Overrides. Let's try this at 103%. There we go. That looks better. So there we go. That's what we got here. That's everything I think for today's video. We could maybe a little more spacing on the sides. Let's, where did we do that? Padding. Yeah, padding. 15 pixels. Yeah, there we go. That looks much better. And we could also add some classes if you guys want to add some fonts or some, yeah, like little icons here. Profiles. Let's do this real quick. Okay, like that. Let's go through and do the same thing. For notifications, we'll do the bell. I've got a lot of these memorized, as you can tell. I do this enough. Icon, we'll do, this is a setting, so we'll do cog. That's for the gear. Separator, we don't need to worry about. Log out. I think they have one called sign out, I believe. So we'll do sign out. Let's try that, see if that works. Okay, sign out doesn't work, but oh, it's sign dash out. Okay. Sign dash out. And there we go. Perfect. So it's looking good. So there you guys go. That is, we probably want a little more spacing on all of these. So let's see here. Let's add margin right 5, just so each of these icons have 5 pixels between them. And now, well, let's add a little more. 10. Yeah. Okay, so there you guys go. That basically shows you, we set up our basic navigation. We got in some overrides. We did some CSS. We did, let's see, what else did we fit in here? Lots of CSS. We got in our basic JavaScript. We set up our view, our overall view component, and got our navigation ready to go. So now in the next video, we're going to start working on creating the login and not log out forms, the login and register forms, and start working on our authentication. Now, I'm not sure if that'll be a couple videos or one video or what exactly, but that's kind of the next few steps we're going to be doing. So we're going to be doing actually creating the login form and the register form. We got to do the front end for that, the CSS and everything. And then we're going to do the authentication. And with authentication, we'll do user roles and everything like that. So we're going to set up some gates and some policies in Laravel and work with user roles and all that kind of stuff. So that's what we got coming up. Hopefully you guys are excited. If you guys learned something new, be sure to leave a comment below. Tell me what it was that you enjoyed and what you learned. And that's all I got for you guys in today's video. So thanks so much for joining me. I'll see you guys in the next one.